going to have Bryan, who many of you know through his books. He recently retired as the editor of Labor et Travail, and he teaches labor history at Trent University. And he has two books that would be of interest to those who are really keen to follow up on some of the thoughts that will come out tonight. James P. Cannon and The Origins of the American Revolutionary Left, and Revolutionary Teamsters, the Minneapolis Truckers' Strike of 1934, which has recently come out. And then, of course...
Really very honored. You can hear me in the back, can't you? And in the front? I'm really very honored to be here, and delighted that Greg Albo asked me to, and the Socialist Project asked me to participate in this. I think the launch of the book, but also I think really an appreciation of Ernie's and Jess's lives on the revolutionary left. These books are, and I urge you all to buy them, these books are wonderfully unique, I think, in the history of the Canadian revolutionary left. They are simultaneously memoir and researched in archives. They are a political document as well as a critique of established developments. They are labor history. They are social movement history. They are a sort of finger on the pulse of a historical moment, the late 50s and particularly the 1960s, that saw incredible ruptures and developments. They are a wonderful account, one which inevitably causes, I think, reflections on strategies, tactics, orientations. They will be the basis for debates and discussions on the left and among historians, I think, for generations to come. So these are really, it's a unique, I think, 2 volumes, and really a very powerful articulation of the belief in and possibility of and vital significance of the revolutionary left. Something which, as it has receded in recent times, it's important to have documents like this that remind us of what was accomplished, what was done. The advantage of going last is that you don't have to cover everything that everyone else has, so I can be mercifully short. I will say that the chapter on the volume on Canada from 1955 to 1965 is also somewhat unique. This is a period that isn't written about that much in terms of particularly the Canadian revolutionary left, and it's a window into what it was like to try to build a revolutionary left organization in the most inauspicious circumstances. It's about Ross Dowson's particular kind of understanding of a party regime and what it was about. It's about educating members and building and creating socialists. It was about intersecting with trade union movements, and the chapter on the Forward with Democracy movement and the organization of Teamsters is just a wonderful statement of a previously very little written about and understood, mobilization. In that period in the mid-60s, when wildcat strikes were the sort of proletarian equivalent of the student sit-downs, and were sort of a reflection of how much things were in motion in this period. Nobody's really talked about Ernie's work in Vancouver, where he was among poets and proletarians, where he worked with Milton Acorn and Al Purdy, where he organized and helped defend South African Trotskyists who were imprisoned at the same time as Mandela. How he tried to overcome the sort of vociferousness and divisions of the Vancouver Trotskyist milieu, which was built around 2 almost competing proletarian households, the Bullocks and the Whitneys. And I imagine that was a tough road to hoe. I can think that would be very difficult. And he also talks about just the class struggle character of that West Coast, which was different than Ontario. It's a wonderful window of reflection. It's really after really being schooled, and what's really quite incredible is that, you know, a 21-year-old would come from Ireland and wander up Yonge Street and look in the Toronto Labour bookstore where Ross Dowson was living in the back of the bookstore, get recruited to Trotskyism, and then springboard into playing the role that Ernie played, not just in Canada, which was incredibly significant, and in the US, where he was, you know, essentially seconded to New York to play a role in sort of regroupment processes around the sort of left-moving elements in the Shachtmanite movement, to bring them into people like Woolforth and Robertson, to bring them into the SWP. A whole range of issues that, and important roles that he played. But he would then be in a position in 1965 to find himself in London, England, with Jess. And here's where, you know, accident in history. I mean, he did not, I think, probably anticipate that tremendous youth radicalization that was exploding at the time was going to provide a kind of wave on which he could ride in his efforts to sort of rebuild the very fractured Fourth International aligned groupings, of which there were a number in London. And that he would soon be speaking before 200,000 people at Hyde Park, where he would be rubbing shoulders with people like Ralph Schonman, I think the name? Schonman. Whose depiction of Schonman in Ernie's book is a I don't know that much about what's written about him, but to me it was an eye-opening kind of look at what made the Bertrand Russell, you know, Peace Foundation tick, and what made the Tribunal happen. Its pluses and its minuses. He's, you know, he played a role really in, I think, making someone like Tariq Ali. Tariq was not really the organizational center of that Vietnam Solidarity campaign. It was Ernie and
his comrades.
And his comrades. Okay. Yes. Yes. And what he has to say about Isaac Deutscher is also very interesting in terms of Deutscher's role as a kind of ecumenical figure on the left who kind of drew on everybody. And I dug into my archive to sort of pick up this little pamphlet, Healy Reconstructs the Fourth International. And this is what really springboarded Ernie into kind of international prominence as the Rodney King of the revolutionary left. In 1966, for selling this pamphlet, he was set upon by Healyite thugs. And really, I mean, we know what's happened, what became of the Healy organization, but what Ernie did in, I think, fighting back, which he recounts with some pride, I think, but what he did after was what was very important. When many on the revolutionary left were basically sort of retreating in the face of this thuggery, which is quite amazing when you think of that these were Trotskyists who had faced this kind of thuggery from Stalinists in 1928, 29, 30, 31 in the United States. And they had basically premised you know, a part of what they were doing in refusing this kind of elementary attack on workers' democracy, on freedom of expression. This is what Cannon constantly did. Organized outside the ranks of Trotskyists to get IWW supporters to form workers' defense guards so that Stalinists could not attack meetings. And yet, when this became part of what was going on in the ostensible Trotskyist movement, too many people retreated. And Ernie refused to do that, and he fought that in a principled way, and he won the right for he and his comrades to sell that pamphlet and other literature in, you know, outside of Healy's meetings. And that was a heroic stand, really, and one of fundamental importance. And so, you know, the second volume really is, you know, an amazing volume in terms of the way in which the subjective element in history can come into play, and how someone like Ernie, with his comrades of course, and with a movement behind him, and with Trotskyist, the arsenal of Trotskyist politics and understandings behind him, can move and develop an incredible impact. So I think really to get the richness of this, you just have to buy the volume. I think for me the striking point, and we can't actually meet as Trotskyists or people interested in Trotskyism and not address differences and political differences. And to me the value of Ernie's book is, even when I might disagree with certain positions or stands, there is an honest articulation of the issues at play in these volumes. So the question of entryism, which I think is fundamental to debates among revolutionary leftists, is opened up in this book in the Canadian situation for people to discuss. The question of Cuba and the nature of the Cuban Revolution is there for people to actually discuss. And the question of the guerrilla strategy is articulated in the late 60s by the Fourth International, and its relationship to the Cuban Revolution is there for people to discuss. And there will be differences, and there will be, I think, necessarily heated debate. These are important fundamental issues. They haven't died. It struck me that a lot of what Ernie was saying about the orientation towards, for instance, guerrilla strategy is very relevant in terms of revolutionary organizations and, for instance, the whole question of Occupy in a benign way, but the sad, in some senses, consequences and developments of the Arab Spring. Certainly the whole question of the G8, G20 protests and Black Bloc kind of orientations. All of that is similar. Our circumstances are different than they were in 69, 68, 69. The issues are different, but yet they are the same. They are the same. There's still a necessity for these kind of debates. How much time do I have? A few more minutes? Okay, I'd like to close then by maybe adhering a bit more to a text, I think, and try to close with some of these larger questions of the meaning of the book. I think the tragedy of our times is that the revolutionary left has been devastated in the decades reaching from the 1970s to the present. As an organized presence, revolutionary socialists have never been weaker in the period from 1900 to 2014, I believe, than they are right now at the present time. Each year sees this fundamental erosion continue, precisely because the revolutionary left has historically interacted with trade unions and socialist movements to strengthen the resolve and fighting appetite of such bodies. It's also the case that these kinds of organizations outside the revolutionary left, but related to it, have also changed. This holds for the trade unions, which have in some senses been decimated by the long march of capitalist retrenchment and state assault since the 1970s. The leadership of the trade unions, for instance, is more ossified, I think, more bureaucratized and more ineffective than at any point really in the 20th century. But this is also true for a variety of other movements, including those associated, I think, with feminism, with reproductive rights, with solidarity campaigns and civil rights, none of which today are leavened, I think, by the revolutionary politics that were so vigorously present in these areas in the 1960s and its immediate aftermath. There are no doubt that there are those who can and will point to this or that exception to this bleak generalization, but on balance, the trajectory of our times from the vantage point of fundamental social transformation is undeniably trending in the wrong direction. But all is not really lost. Things politically did not look very good for the revolutionary left when a 21-year-old Ernie Tate found himself outside that Toronto Labour bookstore in 1955, attracted to what he saw in the window. He joined the revolutionary movement, not in a moment of upsurge, but in a decided downturn. Schooled in a climate of Cold War containment, Tate's choice to be a revolutionary in the worst of times meant that when the best of times appeared, he was there to make a difference, and what a difference it proved to be. It's really impossible not to read his memoir and not appreciate, and I think profoundly so, what Tate sacrificed for the betterment of humanity to build a revolutionary left. He gave up secure employments, family life as it's generally understood, relationships and friendships, various comforts and possessions, his immediate body and his long-term health. He was harassed by the police on both sides of the Atlantic, viciously beaten by Heelite thugs, chased down London alleyways with Tariq Ali by bellicose racists and anti-communists, starved by his political handlers who never quite managed to come up with the funds they had either promised or at least slyly suggested would be coming his way. That's not entirely their fault, but and clearly he would do it all again. There is refreshingly no bitterness in this memoir and no regrets. Tate is even-handed, perhaps unusually generous, to many of those whom he could rake over the coals of burning resentments after years on the left. He does sometimes settle some old political scores, as I know.
We will not say anything.
But this is both to be expected and understandable in books such as these. But Tate's treatment of those with whom he interacted in his days of revolutionary activism in the 50s and 60s are, I think, remarkably balanced. The revolutionary left has always been a collective endeavor. It's always been that, and it always will be. One crucial, if unstated, theme that runs through Ernie's 2 volumes, I think, is how dependent the health of the revolutionary left is on a leadership able to develop its human cadre in effective ways, accenting the differentiated political and positive contributions individuals in its ranks can make, and minimizing the negatives that are always part of particular people's makeups. And dissidents, and this is, I think, inevitable. Dissidents really cannot help but bring with them into their movements and their activism a whole set of sort of the kinds of things that make them dissidents, which are often, as you know, he talks about in terms of Dowson and many other colleagues, which are often create frictions, personality clashes. Revolutionary organizations, perhaps more than any other institutions in capitalist society, are necessarily made up of headstrong and oddly constituted individuals. Maximizing the good work that can be gotten out of each and every revolutionary dissident and minimizing the damage that might be coming from them to their organizations and causes is a good part, I think, of what leadership of the revolutionary left entails. Thus, handling the human revolutionary material of any serious socialist organization is an important component of leadership, a critical complement to the ability, for instance, to chart new theoretical territory or develop an acute sense of strategic direction in specific circumstances. Precisely because few individuals combine this array of skills, the leadership of the revolutionary left, as well as its activist base, relies on collective rather than individualist strengths. And reading Ernie's volumes reminds us of how difficult this can be, even often how revolutionary leadership has come up short in these challenging areas. So being of and in this revolutionary left demands patience, a capacity to stay the course through times stingy in their offerings and stubborn in their building of barriers to human advance. As James P. Cannon once remarked, recalling how things finally came together for his Trotskyist comrades in Minneapolis in 1934, when they led one of the most significant class battles in the history of the American labor movement, he said, "Fortune favors the godly." He was speaking somewhat tongue-in-cheek. If you live right and conduct yourself properly, you get a lucky break now and then. Cannon's tongue-in-cheek reference to godliness aside, revolutionaries do indeed need the odd piece of good luck. They also need to make the most of their circumstances when they do catch an historical break. There was much luck in Ernie Tate arriving in Canada in 1955, and the Canadian revolutionary left benefited greatly from this good fortune. Similarly, there was a measure of luck in Tate appearing in London, England when he did in 1965. No individual and no political organization could have created the conditions and the developments that he encountered there. But Tate made the most of them. As bad off as we are on the left today, we can be thankful for this. we are lucky to have these 2 volumes and the history that Ernie Tate made and recalls for us there.